Dr. Roger Hall has been a beloved and incredibly well-respected historical authority in the Central Coast for over 20 years, where he's taught at Allan Hancock College, as well as Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. He is known as the foremost authority on California history, Central Coast history, and much more. So without further ado, the reason you're all here, I'm so very proud and excited to present Dr. Roger Hall.
Thanks. Well, I'm just really happy that we have the Friday night lecture series. I do again want to thank Leslie Mawson and Susie, who both really were the impetus to not only bring it back this year, but also to have Allan Hancock and his family as the topic. And it's been an interesting experience. I do have a little writing I had done on Hancock, and I had been talking about him to students for years. But one of the truths of history is that when you really get into material, you realize how little you actually know. And the more you get into it, the more you realize you don't know. And there's another thread, and then there's another thing. And it's been a very interesting experience. And of course, tonight is the first of the three on him. I'm not ready for next Friday, so I've got that to work on. One of the situations was figuring out how to incorporate all the different things that he did, but also his family. And he has some very significant family members, and I'm going to be talking a lot about them this evening. And I decided that one of the ways of trying to cope with all of the accomplishments and travails and history, some of it that's a little clear and some a little less clear, was to do fairly chronological take on things. And in doing so, I've met some interesting people. I had met Jim Morrow, who's in the center there, years ago, put me in touch with a few people that knew Allan Hancock, and I deeply appreciate those connections. But I came across an article a couple of months ago by a woman named Jane Brenneman, who's a great-granddaughter of Allan Hancock. And I got in touch with her. The mysteries of the internet revealed the phone number. And Jane was a tremendously gracious person. She's allowed me to come to her house. She is kind of the family historian of the Hancocks, and this is her great-grandfather. And I am so thrilled that she is here tonight. So she is right here. Jane, if you would stand up. And I have to tell you, Jane is leaving the country tomorrow morning, and so I was really happy that she came. I'm going to embarrass you right now. Jane came in and brought me a bottle of wine, coincidentally, from Buena Vista Winery, and if you don't know about that, you'll learn about that tonight. But I decided, because she didn't know that Allan Hancock had a winery, to get her a bottle, and I got her a bottle of Captain Reserve. And so this is for you, from your great-grandfather, and so to speak, and you can pick it up in the lobby as we end. But I do appreciate that very much. She was very, very gracious to share a lot of the knowledge and history that we have here. I would imagine everybody in this room knows something about Allan Hancock and his family. If you've ever gone on the college website, there's a long history about him. He is a person who got engaged in so many different activities, and he did so many of them so seriously. It's kind of a wonder how he was able to do it. The assignment that I typically give for my California history students is to assess, just in lists, a detailed list, the accomplishments of Hancock, but then also look at the challenges, the tragedies, the setbacks that he had, and the last part of it is, would you like to live the life that he lived? And you might be surprised by the variety of answers that you get for this person. I believe, I would argue he is the most significant person who's ever lived in Santa Maria. And I hope over the next few weekends, Fridays, that you might come to see why I believe that. And I find it fully appropriate that the college is named after him. So let me just start with this here. These are book plates, and these are the kinds of things. I don't know how common they are now, but if you have a library and you want to identify yourself, you can buy these papers, and put them usually on the inside cover of your books in your personal library. You can see that these just random examples have some people's names and some things, and you get these. You can also get custom book plates, and Allan Hancock had a custom book plate made for himself in 1932. He was 57 years old. He had nearly 33 years left in his very adventurous life. So, of course, you have his name. I'm going to take away the obvious, the ship. What else do we see? See an airplane, okay. We see a, what was that? The cello up in the upper left. Books, there's a family crest. It's a little hard to see. It's kind of like a telescope there. The globe, which would symbolize travel. There's actually it's a pretty good replica of the certificate for his being a licensed captain, sailing captain, which is where that title comes from. Of course, books also represent knowledge, but he collected a great deal of information. But this is, as I said, 1932. He had so much more that he was going to be getting into. He lived just shy of 90 years, and I'm not sure exactly the date of this picture, but there is a Captain Hancock room here on college, and it has a series of photographs, and it has some portraits of him, and something. I think this picture might be in there too. As I said, many people will know something of these things that he did. I found that in kind of making a list, like when you say aviation pioneer, there's so much that's in that. There's the flight college, there's the fact he was a pilot, there's the fact that he supported pioneering flight, conquests, that he returned a lot of them. The airport in Santa Maria is named after him. Musician, again, farmer. There's so much more you could say to that. Investments here, investments in Los Angeles, investments in education. He started the first radio station in Santa Barbara County. In the very first years of radio, and that's the thing. He just was way ahead of things. He owned the second automobile in Los Angeles. It doesn't look like an automobile. It looks literally like, people used to say, a horseless carriage. But he had it. He was intensely interested in all kinds of particularly the marine sciences, but other pursuits like that. He had a great interest in the country, and he made a lot of associations with the military, with Vandenberg Air Force Base, with a series of very well-known individuals. And like many members of his family, he was a very great contributor to a whole phalanx of causes. So, well, that's odd. So I think, I can't remember who came up with the title, but it seems appropriate. A man on the go. I would add two more things that are more contemporary phrases, I think, that suit him. Lifelong learner, because I think he really was. Throughout his life, he was deeply interested in a lot of things. And although not in the formal sense, as being like what I'm doing, but really a person who was interested in education and in teaching and in sharing his knowledge and and using his money in many cases for the same thing. And it's all very appropriate to me, as I said, like with the naming of the college. Now, a few years ago, I saw that there was a major motion picture being made about him, and I wasn't surprised because of all the accomplishments and things that he had done. I was surprised with the casting. I didn't expect, but you know what? Totally different guy. Don't fall for it like I did. This is a completely different Hancock, it turns out. So,
Oh, yeah.
totally, that was my error. Is he smiling? I don't know. We'll see. Allan Hancock, though, had some very interesting people in his family tree, and I want to get to that. But I want to show you something that I found. The library currently is in pursuit, I'm going to use that word, of what I feel is a treasure trove of films that he had. Some were commercial, some are kind of educational, some seem like, from what we've read, maybe are educational, but maybe family films. Some seem to be of real interest, and the library is trying to acquire these for its archives. But I came across this because one of the complaints I've long had is that there's not enough footage of this individual. And somebody, I'm not even sure who, posted this on YouTube. It's a very grainy, silent film. It's pretty short, and it's graduation at the College of Aeronautics. Sorry? It's okay. There's Allan Hancock passing out the certificates of completion. Because of the uniforms, I'm going to say this is during World War II. Somewhere maybe in the early 1940s. I believe.
She's got a little dog. The lady in the red.
There's a little dog?
Dog on a leash.
I didn't notice that.
You can read Santa Maria up on the roof.
Yeah? You said you have a cleaner copy of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you got one.
I believe that is what becomes Building W. Is that correct?
With the toy projector.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah? It, as I said, I just kind of stumbled across it about a month ago. And I think wasn't here when, isn't that Building W?
Used to be.
Used to be? Okay. That was the main administration building when the college was there. And you can see the cadets are getting their certificates in line, and Hancock is personally handing them out. How he came to have this flight college, how he came to be in Santa Maria, how he came to have a college that was one of 8 picked in the United States to train people during World War II, and actually it trained people during the Korean War as well, is again part of the story of this individual, and the extra efforts that he seemed to go to. But I do want to look at some of his family. Who's heard of this person? Yeah, a lot of you. Okay. And what's his big claim to fame in history? Yeah, wine. Now, can you say his name?
It says right there.
Yeah, I know. I gave you a little clue there because I had a hard time saying his name because my name's Hall, it's very easy to say, and I always stumble over other names like John's son. But Harris, Augustin Harris, who's his grandfather on his mother's side, who's a very interesting person on in his own right. He's from Hungary. It's disputed whether it's nobility. A lot of things you find, you'll hear one version, then you might find other versions. there's a fair amount of material about Augustin. He did like to be called the Count. Apparently, he also liked to be called a colonel. I don't know. I don't think he ever was a colonel. I'm not sure if he was ever a count. I've read that he wasn't called the Count when he was in Hungary. Nonetheless, he is apparently the first Hungarian to move to the United States with his family in 1840. And apparently, they were the first people to get, Hungarians, to get U.S. citizenship. He came to the United States, and he ended up in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, and he founded this town of what is now called Sauk City.
Sauk City?
Sauk.
Okay.
I watched a video just to make sure I could pronounce that. A guy was driving around Sauk City with a video camera, and I just was listening to, I want to make Sauk City. I don't know if you've been there. From that video, I was not drawn. I was not drawn there. But Augustin and his family, Augustin was a person who traveled throughout his life and seemed to do a lot of things, and Sauk City recognizes him there. And I guess they became the town in 1854. He was there earlier. He did all of these things in this town, which he helped create. It was a village originally. Apparently, he was the first person to have steamship service out of this area. He planted hops, which were then used for beer making, and he imported some grapevines, but they did not do well in Wisconsin. This is what you can do in Wisconsin. This is much easier. He hears about the gold rush in California. He's not interested in being a gold miner, but it does draw him west. The only way to get to California in 1849, if you didn't go by ship, either cutting through Panama, which you'd have to then transverse across, because of course there's no canal, or go, as some did, all the way around South America, you essentially had to do the wagon train, which was going to be a lot of walking across the United States. And so he decided that's what he was going to do. And so in 1849, he moves his family and his wife and 6 children, and they take the Santa Fe Trail because they're actually heading towards San Diego. And he's elected captain. Things just seemed to be drawn to him, or he took charge of things. But he came out with his family and moved to San Diego. Population 600. He became, as you see, a prominent individual in San Diego. The first sheriff, the first marshal. He was one of the early subdividers of an area, which I assume he kind of named it after himself, Harrisville, or what is now known as Middle San Diego, or to some, it's Old Town San Diego, at least a part of it. He oversaw the construction of this first jail. There was some controversy. They needed a jail. He put in the only bid. He's the sheriff. He accepted his bid. There was some criticism. It was about a $4,000 building. There was some criticism of the construction. He put in a bid for about $2,000 to fix it. He accepted his bid. Anyways, there is a replica of the jail. I don't know how accurate it is in Old Town San Diego today. But he is, as I said, a prominent individual, as he had been back in Sauk City, Wisconsin. California becomes a state in 1850, and he gets himself, he'll be elected to the assembly. As you see, he had to import these because there are no grapes for him to be growing things. His family grew grapes. They made wine in Hungary, and he seemed to be trying to replicate that where he went. Conditions not ideal for him, but as I said, then he's going to be moving north as he gets into the new California Assembly. So he moves again, this time to San Francisco, and he buys some land, imports some more grapevines, will find himself, his wife and his family is moving along with him. Eleanor Dudinsky is, as you see, a person whose family goes way back and actually has some at least certifiable nobility on her Polish side of her family. She is Hungarian. And so now they have gravitated up into the Bay Area. Yeah. He wrote some books when he was in Hungary later about his travels, and then he will, over the course of his life, write 2 books about his travels in Hungarian, about his experiences in the United States. And he's going to publish those back in Hungary. In San Francisco, you see he's then still doing his agricultural work. He, in the assembly, I just thought it was kind of interesting what his politics were there. He, wanted to lower the taxes. This division of California started even before the state was a state. It originally was about whether California should be a free state or a slave state. And the one suggestion was, well, make it into 2 states, half free, half north, half a slave. There ultimately was a decision to make it a free state, but there's still, as there is to this day, some people who advocate moving the state into smaller pieces. The mint was created because of the vast amounts of gold that are being mined. And as you see, Harris D is going to get himself a series of jobs and become the chief assayer of a great deal of that. As in San Francisco, as in San Diego, he's going to have this problem. He was going to be accused of embezzling. It was a combination of money and gold. There'll actually be a trial. He'll be completely exonerated, but he becomes, I guess you'd say, infamous for a short time. At least his name is. But it just seemed to be part of his, I don't know, the dynamic personality or the flamboyance that attracted, good and bad intentions from some people. But he's not very successful with the grapes in San Francisco. This purple gold, if you accept, seems to be his pursuit. I just want to make the point that he is not the first person to bring in agricultural, grapes, but he's looking for, commercial value, and what the missions had was not that. So really, we have had agriculture with grapes back to the times of the first San Diego mission, but he's looking for something of greater quality. So he moves a little bit, about 50 miles, and he goes up to Sonoma. And there's where he's going to find the conditions that he's been searching for, the right kind of land, the right climate, the heat, the cool, and that, as if you know anything, as I'm sure you do about California wine, it's kind of that trifecta of wine growing. He keeps having to buy vines to bring in. But he does get this, the first, you could say the first winery or the first premium winery or the first commercial winery. But Buena Vista Winery is his stake in California. Now historic landmark and all. But he does much more than just find a place to successfully grow grapes. He just seemed to be the kind of thing that, I don't know how it's imparted through the generations of the Hancocks. He's experimental, he's innovative, he's always trying to learn new things. I was talking to one of the winemakers at Hancock this afternoon, and he was saying, well, I mean, these aren't all new ideas, but these are things you might do here, and he probably was the first to do here. He did, have these cellars built to store his barrels of wine. He apparently was the first to use California redwood, although I'm not sure if it had any particular great value. These pictures are slightly later. These are from the 1870s, but they're, of course, harvesting the grapes here, And here outside, these group of men are sitting around and they're bottling. As you can see all the bottles here, and they're just, looks like pushing in the corks, and they've obviously done the pressings, and they're just making the wine. And his first crop of wine produced over 6,000 gallons. Wow. It was a success. And I guess of a good enough quality that success, of course, attracts more people. And so Harris has found the location, and he's going to go from there. He writes this rather long book, the first one of its kind on California wine, with all of his knowledge that he's been accumulating over the few years that he's been doing this. As I said, he attracts a number of people. Charles Krug is Prussian-born, maybe one of the most significant people that will come into contact with Harris. Krug will apprentice under him, will buy some land in Sonoma from him, and will eventually go on and build his own winery in Napa and help create the foundations of that wine region. And Krug's winery, as you see, as they're saying here on the bottle, the oldest winery since 1861. So he's attracted significant people like Krug and others to his industry. That book, although it wasn't continuous, his winemaking book, is back in print. It's on Amazon. It's about $16 if you want it. I don't know. Christmas gifts. But it's, as I said, it's a lengthy, detailed take on a lot of different things that he had learned about this industry. Buena Vista Winery, of course, is still in operation as well. I have not been there, but as you can see, it is well represented. There's Hasserty's name and the family crest. There he is on one of the bottles, which I believe, what do they call this? The Count. The Count for that one, and the Sheriff's Badge, and the reference to his years in San Diego. The stone cellars that he had carved out are all part of the operation of this continuously operating winery. There's even a kind of annoyed-looking man who purports to be Augustin, and well, he looks annoyed in this pictures. If you know Jim Reed, to me he looks like Jim Reed. He's an English instructor here. But I think Buena Vista has well remembered Allan Hancock's grandfather. They have a museum to the origins of this winery, and he will even take you on a tour as well. So I think Augustin has left his mark on this winery. He'd probably be surprised how much this. I saw the transfer sale of this winery about 15 years ago, and it was about $85 million. I don't know what the winery's worth today, but of course we know it's big business. You've been on the tour, haven't you? Yeah. Well, anyways. Augustin is living in that. He becomes president of the California State Agricultural Society in 1862. And one of the other persons I noticed on this list of that year is Samuel Brannan. Sam Brannan made his fortune in the gold rush. He worked at Sutter's Fort. He was a merchant. And he sold to the miners at those enormously inflated prices, and became California's first millionaire. And I was looking up a couple of the other names. I didn't have time to do all of them. I don't know if this Delano is connected to the town of Delano. I haven't looked. This Davis is not Davis, California, which I was hoping it would be. But yeah, I've looked through some of this. This society is still in operation. And in fact, they have kept all the records all the way back of all their officers and other things. He founded, as you see, the first viticulture society also in California, the first real kind of agricultural corporation. And one of the outcomes of all this effort is As you see, by 1900, most of the wine of the United States is produced in California, as it still is today, despite the enormous amount of competition that you have in many of the states. So Augustin certainly has a claim for all of that. So these are kind of his peak years in the early 1860s. 1863, 2 of his 6 children get married. Arpad and Attila. Those are just names we don't use enough anymore. Really, I want to think about. In a double marriage to Jovita and Natalia, Mariano Vallejo is one of the most prominent Mexican Americans, Mexican citizen, and he had been the governor of all of California. He's a founder of Sonoma. He owned about 250,000 acres. He's a neighbor of Harris'. And what a connection then for these 2 families to join up through marriage. And it's a recognition on this side of Harris' and his significance and what he has accomplished. The 2 sons are going to remain working on wines and other agricultural enterprises with Vallejo during the next few years. So here he's come to the United States 20, 23, 24 years just about, and it's all going to fall apart almost immediately from reasons that they couldn't know at the time. But what Augustin and others didn't know is that when you import certain plants from one area of the world to another area, you may have troubles. And these are galls on a wine grape leaf, and it's part of what can be the destruction of the plants. In California, in places like Sonoma, is this grape. Is it Phylloxera? I'm looking for the science people. Phylloxera? Phylloxera? Mom? Thanks. It's my mom. It helps. Phylloxera. That in its form, it will. They're kind of like aphids, but they will feast as they grow on things like grape roots. And this is just a more modern photograph of a vineyard that is under attack from this pest. There's no. Even today, there's no destruction of these. There's no insecticide for them. What they have figured out over the years, and actually fairly long ago, was hybrids of plants that are resistant to this insect. Augustin and all the others like him. Now, he'd attracted investors. He'd attracted others who were buying land, others who were growing their own vines, and suddenly a lot of people's vines start to die. Who's to blame? Augustin. It's either his techniques. Maybe he had this process of layering and with his crops and maybe making them closer. Anyways, he was going to fall into disrepute with some of the people that he worked with. And for himself, his vineyard just collapsed. And eventually all the vines are going to have to be pulled out and replaced. He had brought hundreds, thousands of vines, hundreds of types. And while Buena Vista will replant and eventually others will buy it, he has to declare bankruptcy, and in a sense he's ruined. This pest will invade Europe. And I'd read that some accounts actually said he's the one that did it. Because what he did in 1861 and 62 was he went back to Europe, he went to France, he went to Italy, he went through lots of vineyards, and he was bringing back lots of cuttings. But it seems that actually there were people even earlier in the 1850s who were moving things around. But in Europe, just to point out how dangerous this is, something like 70% of the French wine industry lost all their vines in the late 1800s and had to replace them all. And I mean, just massive, because there was no stopping it once it got in. and they didn't realize. The thing I'd read was, well, he's carrying soil in his boots, or he had other things and stuff. He may have spread some, but he doesn't seem to be the instigator of it. But that's just, as they say, part of history. So now he's 55. What are you going to do, adventurer? He's the kind of person, okay, we're going to Nicaragua. We're going to start a new business. We're going to go into the sugar and rum plantation work. And he just picks up the next year. He's just kind of just going to keep moving on. He's going to be over in this area of the country, and just as intensive as his work had been. This, unfortunately, will end in tragedy, though, for himself and his wife. His son stayed in California, working in Sonoma, but his wife came with him, and she is going to die, as so many people will in this era, of yellow fever just a couple of months after she arrived. He labored on, but the next year he was going to die. It's a little unclear. He was working alone near a stream. There's various accounts. He fell into a stream and was killed by crocodiles. He was injured in some way. His body was just never recovered, so we don't know. But unfortunately, then his life is cut short in 1869. Still a significant individual that you had. He had built in his heyday there, as you see this rather impressive villa back in Sonoma, and there were fans of his and people, of course, who over the years researched and wrote about him. And there's a number of books, or he's in segments of books about the wine industry. And as you see, a person of some means rebuilt or recreated that villa next to the Buena Vista Winery in this park that is in Sonoma, and it's again part of his legacy. This was the best picture I could get of this, and I didn't mean that didn't have to be here, but it's one of those, here's my teddy bear, it's appearing here and there. So I thought, well, I'm just going to leave the teddy bear in there, because it was the best picture of the building. But his legacy is, as I said, pretty well remembered. San Diego, I'm not sure exactly why, in 1977, had an appreciation day for him with a proclamation. There is a kind of robust Hungarian association in San Diego, and that may certainly be it. Then the Culinary Institute of America started a Vintners Hall of Fame. And not surprisingly, he was, like Charles Krug, was made a founding member of that. And I thought it was very kind of touching that his great-great-grandson Vallejo Harris would accept this. I don't know if this is going to get the attendance like the Cooperstown and the Baseball Hall of Fame, but the Vintners Hall of Fame is, as I said, he's been, I think, rightly recognized and remembered for his contributions to, particularly to California. So that's just his grandfather. I know. This is about me. I know. I understand that. I know. But your family's so interesting. Just hang on. Okay. So his mother. They're so interesting. His mother. It looks like Ida. It's Ida, the third child. There she is when she's about 22 years old. Kind of a less appreciated than she should be individual, I believe. As you see, was born as the family was moving around. They didn't go directly from Wisconsin to California, but then she would come out with her father and the others on the Santa Fe Trail as a 6-year-old. This is about an 1,800-mile trip. It takes 5-6 months. Apparently, they encountered hostile Indians, and you can imagine the kind of adventurous quality and how a 6-year-old might filter that through their mind. So she arrives in San Diego, and just 2 years later, her mother took some of the children back east to have more education, do some other things. Augustin stayed in California. Then later, as a teenager, she and her mother will sail to Europe, where she will spend 2 years in Paris. And she will always remember that connection that she will have with that time in Paris, with some education and other things that she picked up. So, and then she and her mother will come back and reunite with husband and father on that long voyage from here to here, around Cape Horn, which is known for its treacherous waters, all the way back up then to Sonoma. I mean, quite an adventure for now a 17-year-old, having crossed the United States, crossed back, gone to Europe, gone back. And then during the Civil War, she will marry this man, Henry Hancock, 21 years older than her. But Ida's life has so much more in store for it. Henry Hancock is another person, and I point this out again and again to students in the California class. So many people end up in California because of the gold rush. And whether they were in the gold rush or not, but that's going to be the attraction to him. But another person that just did so much. His parents, as you see, from England, and he comes out and he gets a pretty decent education. As a teenager, he's a surveyor, which is not an easy occupation, but it's a very useful, and it can be a lucrative occupation to be a surveyor, and that will prove true to him. Serves in the Mexican-American War, which is, of course, what will wrest California away from Mexico, and along with other parts for the United States. And then in the gold rush, he will come out independent, of course, of the others, but he'll be traveling out here. This is where I find different stories. He made $20,000 in 6 weeks. A number of accounts say that, and that may be the case. Hard to say. I read others that said that's not true. I don't know. Take it away. But it's just like the count and some of the other details I didn't tell you about Augustin's life. It's hard to say sometimes. But what is clear is that he is going to find his place in Los Angeles, and that's why the family is going to end up where they are. For the longest time, all of New Spain, Mexico, and of course north, was under the control of Spain, but really on a map so loosely controlled because they didn't see much value in it. They hadn't discovered gold. And when Mexico goes into revolution against Spain in the 18-teens and gets it in the 1820s, then this just becomes New Mexico, northern Mexico. Same situation though. They didn't see a great deal of value to these lands. There was a lot of political turmoil in Mexico. And so they just kind of left it pretty much as the Spanish had not done too much with it outside of the missions that the Spanish had. Then the Mexican War comes, and California will, along with, as you see, about, in terms of land, about a little over half of Mexico will be transferred to the United States in the Treaty of Guadalupe in 1848. Do you know when they found the gold, when John Marshall accidentally was walking around building a lumber mill on the American River, when he found that gold by accident, looking down into the water? 9 days before that treaty was signed. It's just almost, wow, what people, if they'd only known. But he's going to just look down, there's some of that placer gold right there on the surface. And the gold rush will take some time to really kind of develop. But of course, then the rush comes on and enormous numbers of people don't go to Los Angeles. They go, of course, up into here and into San Francisco. And San Francisco becomes very quickly the largest city west of the Mississippi, one of the largest in the United States. But Los Angeles, that's not where the gold is. So like San Diego, the population is very, very light. But that's where Henry Hancock goes down to. And he does some important things there. This was from the census of 1850. It was believed to be an undercount. People in California, in particular Los Angeles, felt that was not the accurate count. They felt that there was at least 2 or 3 times as many people. And they did another count. But even so, there's a few thousand people in Los Angeles. There's 50,000 in San Francisco. And as you see, while the population of California is going to skyrocket because of the gold rush in this 10 years, Los Angeles, it increases, but it's still pretty small. Supposedly, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be, the first photograph of Los Angeles. Anything strike you about it? It's empty. A lot of land, there's a lot of openness. And, it's a few thousand people. Think of how big those valleys are. Think of how large that area is and how incredibly lightly populated you have here. Henry Hancock becomes, he puts his surveying skills to work. And he's made, as you see, an official surveyor. He's apparently the second person to survey land in Los Angeles. This is one of his maps. And where he's just, as you see, just blocking off land and lots that could assumably be sold to some future interested parties. This is one of his predictions. Now, the population of Los Angeles is probably around 4,000, 4,000. And he's predicting 300,000? Crazy Henry Hancock. Could never be like that. What is the population anyways today of Los Angeles? Not the county, just the city. Is it? This is just like a regular class. It's about 4 million. It's about 4 million. So Henry was really kind of on track. And actually, by the late 1800s, Los Angeles will have a little over 200,000 people, and then its exponential increases will really begin. But at the time when he makes such a prediction, it just, who would have thought such a thing even possible? With this relatively rapid transfer, this 20 years between Spanish and then Mexican and then United States land claims, you've got hundreds of land grants, old Spanish land grants that then some became Mexican land grants or a hybrid of the two, or parcels within those areas. And then the United States, who can sort all this out? And as you see, most of them eventually are going to be confirmed to the owners, but at a great legal cost. And there's, I don't know if I mentioned or if you noticed that Hancock was also a lawyer as well as a surveyor. He was ideally suited for what was about to happen, and that was his first representing a family, the Roca family, in their pursuit of Rancho La Brea, but it cost them so much that by the time they got claim to it, they could not afford to maintain it all. So they sold some of it to the lawyer who had helped them acquire it. And so Hancock and his brother were able to acquire a little over half of Rancho La Brea. And I just circled it here because I didn't think you could see it, but this is essentially central Los Angeles today. And of course the ocean, and now we're down here, and I don't remember all these names. But he's able to get a claim on this land as a number of people did because of the all the legal consternation that people were dealing with. So he acquires Rancho La Brea for roughly $2 an acre. Sometimes it seems less, sometimes slightly more, but about that. And he will then, of course, center his family on this land. And you know, it's like anything. If only you knew. If only you knew what was going to happen to Apple stock in 1985, you would have put all your money into it then. But you know, who would know there? What does Brea mean?
Tar.
Tar? Rancho tar? That doesn't sound good for agriculture, and of course that's going to be part of the land issue that he has. But just as he acquires it, the Civil War breaks out. In California, the tensions over slavery and in places like California are going to be a part of that. But you know, back east, of course, you know, you get the 7 and then 11 states seceding, and the country's in a great crisis. And Henry goes back into military service as he had done during the Mexican War. Southern California was much more pro-Confederacy than, when you say Northern California, you probably mean San Francisco, because that's where most of the population was. Union Square in San Francisco is named that because a lot of pro-union speeches and rallies were held there. And the Alabama Hills, well, they're going to be named after the war by Confederates who were in Southern California. But Henry is on the side of the Union, and he will be, as you see, a major and then stationed at Camp Drum, which was, although it doesn't seem necessary, but there was the concern, well, Confederate sympathizers might seize the port, might use the harbor, and so the mission of the camp was to protect the port of Los Angeles. And he was successful in doing that. But that was what he was doing during the war. It's hard to see, and I don't think it's clear enough, that is not a horse there. That's a horse. You know what that is? You said it? It's a camel. The United States in the 1850s was experimenting with camels, just as later in 1862 there's going to be the private company, the Pony Express, which lasted for 18 months because financially it made no sense to have so many, like 120 riders with all those horses and all those way stations, moving a couple saddlebags of mail. To mail a letter on the Pony Express costs the equivalent of like $75. It just didn't work. It's kind of romantic, but it didn't work. So here's the less romantic idea, and Henry Hancock had an idea because when the Army decided in a few years that they were going to sell their dozens of camels, he bought a couple dozen of them, and he wanted to create a camel express between Los Angeles and St. Louis. And I only wish he had. That would have been so cool to say we had a camel express. And instead of the rider moving along, you'd be spitting camels. And anyways, he abandoned the idea at some point. Maybe a camel spat at him, I don't know, but it didn't happen. But Fort Drum did have these camels. And if you're in Southern California, you're going across the desert or something, it made sense, Mojave. Well, he marries Ida, as I said, during the war, and then, of course, 2 years later, the war has concluded. So you got this rancho, this tar, and many people, it's a nuisance, and it's in the way. It fouls everything, and the land is not great for agriculture. It's not even that great for ranching. But he saw the value in that you could use this material in its kind of semi-solid or viscous form as you see. It's a great building material. And he mined it, essentially. He just had people digging it out and shipping it to San Francisco. I'd like to find out, I haven't yet, how much he got paid for it, but tons of it, of course. used for all kinds of things. You know, the Chumash and other natives were using this kind of thing as water sealants, and you know, they'd figured out a few things. But that's what he was essentially doing during that time. It's not an easy life on the rancho. There's not a lot of population. That house is in a little disrepair, but that's the house that they were living in. You know, the water is a combination of sometimes tar, and I imagine it was kind of smelly and a little befouled, and you know, just challenging things. So they spent a lot of time in San Francisco, and it was there, as you see, that they were when Allan Hancock and his twin brother were born. And as you see, Bertram, who was back in Los Angeles, was born a couple years later. So there's the earliest picture that I've seen of Allan Hancock on the right-hand side. He's been about 5, and then his brother Bertram. That's a great picture. It's really, and it's a great quality picture too. But as you see, you know, his twin had not survived. So now we brought Hancock into the picture at least, and so we have that. But then, just a few years later, Henry dies young, you know, and because it was a heart ailment, if I recall correctly, there was a lot of things tied up in this rancho. He is a very accomplished person in what he, you know, serving in 2 wars, being on the east side of the Union, all of his early work in Los Angeles. He was a lawyer in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and he did a lot more lawyer work than I mentioned. And just engagement, he also was elected to the Assembly and served a term. He just did a lot of things, but unfortunately he left a lot of debt. And by the time it was paid off, there was very little money, and now you have Ida, 2 young children, a lot of debt, as they say, land rich, cash poor, and prospects are not tremendous for her. And that's where I think Ida doesn't get the credit that I think that she has. She did try and be in San Francisco, but was finding there were squatters on the rancho. There were just it was just too difficult to be hundreds of miles away, and so she really needed to live there to try and run things. And it was then her dealing with her 2 children and all. And another tremendous setback, the tragedy, was that Allan and Bertram dies, as you see, shortly after a visit to the World's Fair in Chicago. And as I said, when asking students to, you know, assemble a category of the lives of Allan Hancock, and these are parts of the things that I'm sure are going to have a profound effect on him throughout his life. His father and now his brother dying so young. Just a few years before, as you see, before the rancho was taken, the first oil well in Pennsylvania had been drilled. And in the 1860s, the combustible engine was being developed, and now you've got this new machinery and new products, and now this land's looking a little bit differently. And the oil boom is going to take off in California. Sometimes people are surprised that by the early 1900s, California is going to be the leading area of oil production in the United States and in most parts of the world for a time. And kind of what we would say super tankers, although not the dimensions we'd have today, are going to be developed to ship California oil. Well, Ida's not unaware of all of this. So she's going to try her hand in this. Doesn't have a lot of money, so she leases off some of the land, and the venture collapses. I forgot how many oil wells they promised. I think the Pacific Coast started 4, finished 1, didn't produce, and the whole thing went belly up. And her 1/8 royalties weren't going to amount to anything. She comes back, and this time they struck it rich. And the Salt Lake Oil Company was a combination of leasing land, and then ultimately they would develop their own. That they were going to. This was where the Hancock, fortune was going to be established. As you see, Allan, who's then about 25, is going to learn the oil business, hands-on, and work in a number of aspects of the Salt Lake Company. This actually, just to be, I always feel like I need to be compelling. This is actually in Texas. I just like the picture, and so. But it's it made the point. No lawsuits. So 1901, Allan Hancock's going to get married. There he is. I'd never seen a picture of him with a mustache. The picture is from the 1890s. I don't know for sure if he had it in 1901, but I just really like it, and he might have had it. But he married Genevieve Dean Mullen at a very large wedding. Apparently about 1,000 people attended this. This cathedral in Los Angeles was the preeminent cathedral of Los Angeles. The family fortune has been, as I said, really established. And Genevieve Dean Mullen, her father, is a prominent businessman in Los Angeles. He is going to buy into a clothing store that will operate into the. He started in he joined it in the 1880s, and it goes into the 1940s. It was a union kind of like what Augustin's sons had done between two well-established, now well-to-do families. That's the cathedral in the 1880s. It was built in 1876. And they said at the time, it's kind of hard to tell from the size, they said about 1/10 of the population of Los Angeles could fit inside the building. Because the building's big and the population's small. But that's where he was. He would have this marriage. They will rather quickly have 2 children, Bertram, of course named, I would assume in honor of his brother, and Rosemary. And just the Mullen Blewett and Company was the clothing store that Genevieve's family were part of. And I'm sure some of you recognize the connection with Rosemary and Rosemary Farms and such as things like that. So he then, again, I don't know if he had the mustache, but that's the second picture I found with him with a mustache, and I just wanted to include it. But he, with financing from his mother, they formed their own company, and La Brea Oil is just as successful as the Salt Lake Oil Company. And over the years, you can see, of course, this is the Rancho and the many oil derricks. But as Los Angeles will grow, this is actually in the early 1920s, how the Rancho is being surrounded, in a sense, by all the success of Los Angeles. But all of this land was just very rich and produced quite robustly here. The story always seems to be he never drilled without success. 71 out of 71 times he hit oil. And those are kind of averages in terms of how many barrels per day. The volume, of course, is going to fluctuate. But if you just take that as a general kind of, I sort of pick the mid-range, $1,000 a day in 1909 to millions of Americans would be 2 years' income. And so, I mean, just to give you a sense of the wealth that was being generated in oil. And this is part of the La Brea oil fields here. You can see for some reason, they were able to put a derrick in the middle of the street. I don't know if zoning laws are going to go for that now, but and there's just, you see, in all these productions around this land, lots of things succeeding for it. And that's a little bit later, just again the Rancho and its production. By this time, Signal Hill and Long Beach will be discovered, and there'll be one big strike after another in Los Angeles. This was a little earlier than most of them. And those were some of the most productive oil fields in the world in terms of amount of oil per acre or square mile that will come out of these areas. And Ida becomes one of the wealthiest persons in the state. All that production. And she, which seems to certainly run in the family, was a philanthropist. She had an account that was a private, it's kind of described as a secret account that she just had, where she often anonymously gave money to a variety of different charities. Susie and I were looking at some of the things near the end of her life and her wills and the listings of where she was sending money. But during her lifetime, she was, as I said, remembering her time in Paris and sending money to those schools. She was a fairly religious Catholic person and gave a lot of money to a variety of things, particularly ones that involved children. Next time you see those bells along 101, you can say, well, the Hancocks, they had a little contribution along with others to this. And that just seemed to be, I think that's going to have certainly an influence on her son. She had built a nicer 10-room house on the land, and then there are a series of these villas that you have. And if you take a look at this one, there's one in Florence that's going to be an influence, but the towers and the arch in the center and just those designs. And she will hire one of the more renowned architects, a man named John Austin in Los Angeles, who did a number of significant buildings. And in 1909, she's going to build what the Hancocks are going to call Villa Madonna, right there on Wilshire and Vermont. And as I'll say at another time, Hancock is going to have a lot to do with the development of Wilshire Boulevard in his lifetime. This was a 23-room house with 4-story towers. It had all kinds of just kind of sumptuous design to it, kind of from that era of kind of an eclectic, different countries, different types of art. There's a picture of it, as you see, from the early 1920s. It was considered one of the nicest houses, most grand houses on Wilshire. And I've also read maybe in Los Angeles, one of the nicer, certainly recognizable houses as well that he and his mother were going to reside in. This is just a scene out of a film. And there's the house in the background. They used it on location. Jackie Coogan, this actor, their child actor, and I'm pretty sure they knew that was back there. She had that there. So she's a philanthropist. She's you could say oil tycoon. She has overcome certainly adversity in losing her husband. She has successfully raised Allan. She's had to deal with the loss of her son Bertram. But she will remarry, as you see here, to another prominent person in California, longtime serving judge, Erskine. There's another name we don't use enough now, Erskine Mayo Ross. And I just love the descriptions, what you get in the newspaper. She had her going away suit, 2 shades of French gray. Just sounds wonderful. Waist of cream point lace. I don't even know what it all is. For ashes of rose, it just sounds great. Unfortunately, she is not going to live too many more years. And in 1913, she's going to die. And it seemed to be a long-time stomach ailment, and I can't seem to find anything more than that. As I said in her wills, there was a lot of generosity. This was a story that was written a week before she died, and I think this is part of then the recognition of her significance. And the headline was "Madame Ross Nearing the Eternal Sleep," and this was in the Los Angeles Times on May 5th here. And it's surrounded by luxury, love, and devotion. Mrs. Ida Hancock Ross, wife of Judge Erskine M. Ross, lies in her palatial home, Vermont Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard, resignedly awaiting the hour of the eternal sleep. And it goes on to describe how she has outlived her 70 years, but of robust build and much vitality. And they talk about her stomach trouble. They mention her contributions to things and her accepting of these realities. It's really actually quite a beautifully written story, but a week before. And I think there was some recognition that then seems to have not followed through in history enough for her. It seems that the probate court valued her wealth at just about $4 million in 1913. Her lawyer said it was $1.5 million. The state of California said it was as much as $12 million. And it was all about a fight over taxes and inheritance taxes. And I don't know if I'd say it was ugly, but there was a number of back and forths between the state of California. And it really was, how much could you sell the rancho for, those 2,000 acres? And if it was $2,000 an acre, that would be $4 million. Whatever the actual value of her estate, I mean, it certainly was considerable. I would kind of think the $4 million, which seemed to be more or less impartial, might have been it. She had kept her son on a retainer, and for much of his time, she'd actually paid him less than that. And then the last 5 years or so of her life, she'd moved him up to $1,500 a month, which was, a very comfortable living. But then she is going to pass on, of course, the some to her husband and all these others, but the bulk of it will go, of course, to Allan. He lives in the house some, but in the next years, he is gone a great deal. He travels extensively, and ultimately, he is going to be really migrating up toward Santa Maria. And unfortunately, and I think it is kind of the times in which this existed, but they tore the house down in 1939, just 30 years old. I don't think that would happen today. But the cathedral was significantly damaged, the one where he's married, in the Northridge earthquake. And the Catholic Church wanted to tear it down. And there were all these preservation movements, and they saved the church, even though it's not actually a church anymore. It's used for other purposes. But unfortunately, this tremendous house was taken down, I think, far too soon. But Allan Hancock wanted to preserve elements of it, and so he is going to have parts of the rooms in some of the rooms preserved. This just to show you what's there now on Wilshire and Vermont. This is part of Koreatown. There's a subway line underneath this building. You could say it's a lot more efficient. There's a lot more people. It's a mix of property that's, retail and commercial. Can you see? I didn't even get this for a while. Do you see this? See what the two buildings, the art? Put it together? Yeah, it's a bowl. Yeah, Koreatown, I get it. I wish that was there, but anyways, that's me. But what Hancock had done was he preserved some of the rooms, and they're still now in USC, in a building which he will later build on the campus of USC. And they took down, you see the interiors and the furnishings, the light fixtures, the carpets, and there's 4 rooms that were preserved. Obviously the dining room, as you see here, the music salon, which was an important part of his life. It's a little dark. Let me turn it up for you. There we go. Yeah. But Hancock was an accomplished musician and an impassioned musician, and is going to do a number of important things with music. and for other musicians in his life. And his mother certainly encouraged a great deal of that, and so this was an important room for both of them. And now it's, as I said, part of a house museum in a sense. You can see it by appointment, even the staircase and all. As I said, within this building, which is going to have even greater importance to Hancock and what he's going to be accomplishing. So he is in 1915, 40 years old. You know, he's had his ups and his downs in the respect. Never got to meet Augustin because of his earlier death. Didn't know his father very long. Had lost his brother. And now he's lost his and it really was beloved mother. He has a tremendous amount of money. Of course, he's married. He has 2 young children. What to do? And this is the kind of thing that, you know, where I think it separates people like him from others. We all know this about what you do with wealth. For some people, it's you buy another house. You know, we got 6, we'll get 7. We'll increase our car collection or something, and we'll do that. And Hancock, you know, of course, could have done something of that nature, but as we know, he's going to take a different route to these things. He's, as I said, going to be the ship captain. He's going to be an accomplished cellist. Oh, those are coming out with those little weird lines. He'll have the flight school and all of his interest in aviation. It's kind of fun how they drag along. He'll have his railroad, the marine scientist. Where's that picture taken? In the Galapagos there. I don't think that's legal now. You can't do that to these animals anymore. You can't grab them by the tail. But no, he was doing some important stuff there. He's going to make connections. That's J. Edgar Hoover and some important connections with individuals, and of course his own pilot work. He's, as I said, as a businessman, he's going to develop real estate in Los Angeles, commercial and residential, significant areas of it. He's going to fund the first flight across the Pacific just a year after Charles Lindbergh flew solo across the Atlantic. Hancock will do this anonymously. He doesn't fly it, but he funds the crew. He bought the airplane, rehabilitated the airplane, and paid for everyone. And then after they had accomplished this, he gave them the airplane. They later gave it back to him. He later gave it to a museum. And so he does that. He will, of course, move to Santa Maria and develop a large agricultural operation, which will include ice houses and, of course, the railroad and the land itself, and eventually thousands of chickens and other kinds of agricultural pursuits. The land that we're on will, of course, go from being the flight school to eventually being the college. And there he's standing next to Ernest Righetti as they do groundbreaking. I'm sure you know Righetti High School. And there's other pictures where he's with a number of very interesting people in Santa Maria. And of course, you may know the bust. The original is in Los Angeles, and there's a copy of it out in front of the library here. So he's posing for this. And of course, then as the college is going to be built and built up in about 1962 and 3, and there he is with his wife, Marion. You know, for all the things that are, there's his car. We're going to talk about his car at another time. It's kind of a car. It's got a stick there and stuff. It's not moving. It's just a picture there. He paid $700 for that. Wow. 2-cylinder. But you know, and this is the kind of thing. He buys apparently the second car in Los Angeles, and then what does he do? Does anybody know what he does? How could you promote the car industry in Los Angeles? Auto Club. And he's the first president of AAA. which I just used a couple weeks ago. First president of AAA in Los Angeles. And that's the kind of thing, he didn't just buy a car, he then became a car enthusiast and all of these things. Now, I hope you're not disappointed, but I wanted to keep this part for the second and third lecture and talk about the accomplishments in the Galapagos and the other travels that he's doing and all of his ships and everything in the 1930s and into the 40s and his music. And I hope you will return next Friday and in 3 weeks for the third one on him, which will, the third one will be the most concentrated on his time in Santa Maria, as I said, kind of the chronology of it. But that's as far as I was going to go this evening because I wanted to keep within our time limits and all. So I'm going to do that. So thank you. Thank you.